This is the lecture on lettering, and I apologize for the utterly boring lettering on this title page, but let's just get into it. I think there's a lot of places you can learn online about how to make, excuse me, ordinary word balloons and ordinary lettering that looks like an ordinary comic book. Nothing says, look at me, I'm a comic book, like a ellipse with a sort of triangle at the bottom with some text in the center. And you can do that, and heck, I do it. But I want you to understand that really you're just adding another visual element to your drawings. And that visual element is depicting text. It's depicting dialogue. It's depicting thought in words. And so you have any number of possibilities in front of you. So this presentation is about that. This slide is basically saying that too. You're trying to show somebody speaking. So how can you do that? Here's some examples which are not typical. This is Kyle Baker. He's putting all the lettering below the characters. The characters are speaking, and you can see they're always right below them. They sort of take up the same amount of horizontal space, or is that vertical? Sorry. The width, let's say, that the characters take up. She gets a little longer one here. She gets a little longer one there, etc. Kyle Baker has done a similar thing inside the panel. Here is the same thing. You notice there's no marker pointing to the character. You just know who it is. It's usually because it's over their head. I know Kyle Baker worked in film after doing these two books. These look a little bit like storyboards, but I don't know if that's what he was going for back then. Somebody who did something similar about 20 years prior was Vaughn Bodē, or Bodie. Here are his lizard character and his Cheech Wizard character, and they're talking. And again, he's drawing the panel as a rectangle, and the balloons are above it. Balloons are above it. Balloons are above it. I don't know exactly why Bodie did this. I assume it's because he really liked the artwork and didn't want to spoil it. I also assume it's possibly, since this is full color and was printed in magazines in the 60s and 70s, that maybe he didn't want the lack of clarity that sometimes can happen with full color reproduction. And it's possible he also was imagining it would be translated. And it's also possible that, I know he did these presentations called cartoon concerts, where he just liked to show the images on slides and say the dialogue himself, and it gave him that ability. So who knows what particular reason out of those four was the most important one, but for whatever reason, this is how he did it more often than not. And it was really fun, and never once did you question how it would read. It just felt like a comic. It read really nicely. Some other thoughts to think about is what Brian Biggs is doing here. Different characters give different sort of text treatments. This character, who's a little bit loopy and a little bit unhinged, gets this up and down, lowercase, uppercase, mixture of things. This elegant character gets this script font that's really elegant. And I think I have a panel or a page later with a police officer. Yeah, there it is. Excuse me. There's the police officer speaking in a bold, he's dead all right, probably rubbed on font, rubbed on from transparency. There's the elegant man speaking again. There he is again. There he is again. And he's the one narrating. So we see that same typeface, which still has a real human quality to it. Vanessa Davis does these flat balloons that come right from her mouth. I love how they just sort of float out. And here they even float out and sort of wrap themselves around to this character's mouth here and here. Vanessa's been doing this for a very long time and does other sorts of things. Here there's text above the panel, this little zigzag coming from the computer. This kind of thing is even a little more odd coming from Mickey Z here. You can see it goes all over the place. It goes up, straight up, all, and these balloons everywhere, but you never really lose it. It's part of the artwork. It's part of the style of the pen. This harkens back, or at least me, it reminds me of this kind of thing, and I think this is the late 1700s, believe it or not. It's certainly depicting that, but I think it also dates back to that. And these characters all waiting at the fort, their word balloons sort of going upwards. Back then, there wasn't a standard, and so they didn't get bogged down into this boring word balloon, and ruled type kind of thing. It's really elegant, I think. And that brings us back to or lets us go back a little farther to pre-1900 lettering. This medieval lettering in Latin is on this scroll, but it's clearly coming from this character's mouth. Excuse me. I forget what the date on this is, around 1800, I think. And again, we see it sort of coming right out of their mouth and sort of lifting up like a banner, kind of like a banner in the sky. Not a scroll as much as the previous one, but it almost feels flat. I really like how it fits in with the artwork. It adds a little anarchy in the way it's designed here, but this is an anarchic panel, and so is this one. So to me, it works really well. A little more calm, guessing probably 100 years later, maybe 50 to 75 years later, is this. This has a sort of wispy feel to it. It reminds me of an image I couldn't find of Will Eisner saying that lettering sort of is depicting the exhalation of breath and the way in which words come out of our mouth on our exhalation. And so that's what I get out of this a little bit. Here's another one, probably late 1700s. Maniac Ravings, or Little Boney in a Strong Fit. And look at just how all of his sort of, the things he's freaking out about are in this. This would be very modern today. You really immediately get the sense that his head is full of these sort of shouting, conflicting things. And it's even painted like a bright sun, too, which is pretty great. And also there's that sun sort of image there, too. A little, excuse me, a little later, more of those kind of flat banners, but they're getting a little more sort of formalized here and less anarchic. We saw that image before. This is around 1900, I think. Characters, again, the words just sort of fit where they fit, but they do fit. That's an important thing to realize, is they're considered, but also they don't have to fit in a sort of standard way that we're used to. This is 30, 40 years before that kind of thing got codified, maybe 20. This is the early 1900s. It's starting to get a little bit codified now. Now the text is horizontal so that we don't have to sort of turn the paper much while we're reading. It's the same sort of, and now it's in newspapers. That previous one probably was in a magazine. And it's the same horizontal reading style as the title above it. And so it's getting a little bit more codified. These tales, every creator around this time sort of has his own version or her own version of these tales. Same thing is happening in this Buster Brown strip. What's not exactly getting codified is the shape of the balloons. Sometimes they have a little roundness to them. Sometimes they go right around the letters, and other times there's a little more room. This is around the same time. This is Lionel Feininger. He's having a lot more fun. The words are bigger. They've got serifs, which we'll talk about. They go around this corner like this for this whale. I think he's having a lot of fun with it. Feininger was a designer and worked in many art forms, not just comics. And this is Little Nemo by Winsor Mccay. Cartoonists like to say that lettering was the one thing Winsor Mccay wasn't good at. And you can see why they would say that here. It's cramped. It's a little bit tiny. Most importantly, it's too close to the balloons. It gets a little cluttered. Everything else is so elegant. All the shapes in every panel have a compositional integrity. And the words feel like they were sort of an afterthought. I think there's a good argument for that. With a little bit more room, they would have fit in better with the sort of shapes he was creating. So let's think about this. Lettering is drawing. It's not handwriting. I like to argue that you should make it beautiful like you make your drawings. Make it part of the drawing. If you can't make it beautiful, make it interesting. I think that's fine. And if you can't make it interesting, at least make it readable. So we'll see some examples of all three of those. I think this is a good example of readable. You know, there's a lot of words on it, and you need to follow the story. You need to follow who's saying what, and so they give you lots of words, but they're ruled out. They're horizontal. The balloons aren't so elegant, I don't think. This one actually, you know, everybody has their own definition of elegance maybe, but I like this one. I don't like this one. It's too close to some of the letters. But anyway, it's not going out of its way to be beautiful or expressive or even interesting, but it's darn readable. This from Al Cap, he's going a little bit out of his way to be interesting. I don't think he's going out of his way to make it beautiful. It's readable and interesting, but he's adding bold here and there to sort of emphasize the way that the speech is happening, the way the characters are speaking. Big ha, big come here. That gives me an idea. Bullseye. It's Garson. Things like that. But still, it's mostly ruled. It's mostly straight. It's pretty cramped, but not as cramped as that last one. It's a little more expressive. The artwork's a lot more expressive too. Here's an interesting example where it's readable and beautiful, frankly, I think. And this is by George McManus. This is Bringing Up Father. And notice the word balloons, and we'll call them that for now. It's the best word, I guess, for them. They sort of have a similar feel to some of the shapes and some of the sort of Art Deco-like shapes that happen in a lot of the rest of the strip. It's a very stylized strip, and the letters are clean, like all these curtains and windows and plaids and other things are clean. And there's a nice sort of rounded square corner that you'll see in some of the other shapes too. So he's really trying to make it part of the drawing, whereas the creator of the Bungle family isn't doing as much, but is certainly trying to make it readable. This is, to me, readable, beautiful, and interesting all at once. It's Walt Kelly's Pogo. And you can see he's playing around with what it looks like when the character is singing, what it looks like when the character is sort of responding in these short, sort of guttural responses. The lettering itself, when they're reading or when they're speaking, is elegant. The balloons, rounded, lots of air and space in them. They're part of the composition. This is part of the composition. One thing that's interesting about Kelly too is that these word balloons will spill over into the next panel when they need to, but he makes room for them. He'll borrow from another panel if he needs to. Here you see it again, and he always makes it work. There's more Kelly. When people think about Kelly, they think about pages like this that has a lot of different typefaces or fonts for different characters. They think about this one here, which is this sort of P.T. Barnum-like character who speaks in these kind of circus banners. Pogo in person, stupendous news, wondrous words, Pogo will run. You know, it's like a banner. It's even got little pin marks here, and it looks like a hastily printed sheet that is designed to get you to come to a circus tent. Likewise, this character, this sort of Gothic preacher, speaks in this really, German Gothic font here. Some things to, think about, and I think this is good for your own searching to go looking for this some more, are some terms like serif, sans serif, ascenders, descenders, baseline, letter space, or tracking, which is sometimes called kerning, but kerning used to be a verb and not a noun, but it's sort of changing. So I'll show you what I mean. Serifs are these little things, these little sort of tick marks that you see at the bottom of certain letters. So this use of this word here, Gotham, has serifs. However, everything else on this page, or nothing else on this page, has serifs. Compare the M, for instance, or the A. That A has a little tick mark here and a little bulb there. Those are serifs, and they're not on this sans serif font here. Also, the M has these little feet. No feet here. That's sans serif without serifs. So the serifs are fancy, just a fancy addition. Stare at this page for a little while, or research and try and find another one, and you'll start to understand some of what goes into type. It's a big world. So here's use of serif in a cartoon or in a comic by Dan Clowes. He's having fun with the title here. It's a really fun, lively serif font. Most of his lettering is in a sans serif. It's easier to read when it's small. This typeface has little serifs on it. It's designed to feel like it's a blog or a zine, or it's a computer or typewriter. So it has that feel to it. Same thing here and here. So lettering communicates a tone and a feeling and a context. Excuse me. This is Robert Crumb doing Nausea, Jean-Paul Sartre's Nausea, and he's also using this serif font. But notice none of it is straight. None of it is parallel to itself. You can zoom in and see how it's not ruled exactly. There are lines, and he sort of keeps to them, but it is really designed to be sort of like a little bit nauseating, for lack of a better word. It's a perfect word. In the text, it's sans serif. It's a little bit less fancy. People sort of don't speak in serif fonts. They don't speak in cursive, according to sort of common wisdom. We saw Brian Biggs trying otherwise, though, I think successfully. There he is, speaking in cursive, speaking in uppercase and lowercase, this character. So what does the character speak like? Now we're going to get into just some random examples of different cartoonists who do slightly different things. What I find interesting about Ben Catcher is all horizontal in all the captions, but in all the dialogue, it's like at a 20 or 30 degree angle, consistently. He does this a lot. It's really funny. And it just sort of creates this weird world where things aren't quite right, or they're not quite settled, or you're looking at them kind of askew. It's perfect. There it is again. And you see, again, that whatever it is, 20 or 30%, probably 20 in the dialogue. And it just sort of lifts it up. It continues because it moves this direction, which sort of leads our eye to sort of into the next balloon, which is interesting. But it also sort of makes it slightly off kilter. So Vanessa Davis again, and again we're going to look at here just how everything kind of flows out of her mouth. It sort of makes the characters kind of a little more, I don't want to say bubbly, but it's like less considered and more fun and social, I think. And again, harkens back to 200 years ago when we're looking at this kind of text, which kind of just comes out of that mouth, The text here is a little fancier. The context of how people read was a little different. I've seen that image two times before. And here's Bill Griffith playing with this in a Zippy cartoon. Devil take me, it gives me the itch all over to be in your presence. Zounds, what a funk I am in as well, sir. And anyway, so they're speaking and dressed in this like 19th century sort of clothing, early 19th century. And then suddenly they're back to normal. The balloons are a little bit normal, or consistent with our modern times, and the characters are dressed like they normally dress. Geez, what happened? Suddenly we're characters from early 19th century satirical British broadsheets. Those wispy speech balloons were weird, huh? And then it goes back to it in this last panel, and Zippy is presenting this this bill or contract or poster. He doth tax us to excess. Alas, we are left with no recourse but to viciously lambast the Prince of Wales. Anyway, so it's Bill Griffith, who's an extremely well-versed cartoonist in many styles, playing around with this sort of change of styles. This is a great example of it fitting in with the artwork. The artwork is really a little obsessive and claustrophobic, and these word balloons, which might not work in someone else's artwork, work pretty well because of that claustrophobia, I think. Here's Ivan Brunetti doing a really nice job of just plain words and a little mark coming off the character. It's horizontal, the lettering has a nice sort of flair to it, feels like it's drawn with the same sort of pen and the same kind of marks that the drawings are made from, and I think that's important, or at least that it integrate with it well. It's just simple and really beautiful. Randomly just jumping all over the place here. This is Crazy Cat from about probably 1920, and this is back to what we were seeing early, was that long line and words. His Harriman's lettering was fun in that it was sort of all over. It was angled left, sometimes angled right. It was a little bit bouncy inside of the balloon, and that made sense for how the characters were and how the strip was. This is Warren Craghead having fun with taking text from a Peanuts comic and just putting it over a house as if you're hearing it from a house. Linus, do you think I'm a crabby person? Stand right there, don't move. Yes, I think you're a very crabby person, and sort of integrating it with these images of the house. It's totally a different context, but he's playing around with the sounds and or the shapes of the words and making the words expressive in ways that we'll see going forward. This is Will Eisner, and you can see he's being very expressive. This woman is crying. She's overwhelmed. God in heaven, I don't believe this is happening to me. In my condition, I'll drop. And things sort of get back to normal a little bit around here. Now the word balloons, these characters are regular word balloons, and finally the mother's able to say word balloon here too, but in this very emotional, overwrought sort of sequence, it looks like this. No word balloons, again, very typical of Jules Feiffer. You can find decades worth of Jules Feiffer in his just sort of text and little pointer, which works really well. Shoujo manga has a really nice trick of having transparent word balloons. I have never seen an American who wasn't already steeped in manga do this. I like it a lot. I love the idea. For some reason, our balloons always look like this. They are sort of a flat intrusion to the composition, but this sort of invisibility or transparency works really interestingly. There it is again. Some random examples. This is Milt Gross, who had fun every line he drew, whether it was a letter or a character, and you can see it here. Just lots and lots of fun. And here's Milt Gross again. This is Craig Thompson. Two examples from him from two different books, probably 3 or 4 years apart. This book is lighthearted, although sad, but lighthearted. The characters speak with this uppercase and lowercase mixture, little frilly bits on some of the letters, loops, things like that. This story, which is much more straightforward, somber in places. It's about teenagers who are also somber, I think. The lettering is much more consistent. It has a slight italicization to it, which lends it a little urgency, but it's also straightforward. And here's more from that first book, Goodbye Chunky Rice. You can see how the lettering for things like the waves and the hammering fit in with the lettering that you see for the rest of the dialogue. More from Goodbye Chunky Rice, Kapoosh, Kush, Whelp, Almighty, etc. This screen is important for me to show because we stripped out the word balloons, or maybe Brendan sent me this before he lettered it. But notice how the word balloons fit really well, and I just don't mean where they are, but I mean the lines. The lines feel like they belong in this world. The shapes feel like they belong in this world. This circle feels like it belongs in the same place as that sun and that balloon and this pterodactyl. And that's really important to integrate your shapes and your lines. Everybody has their own they find their own system for it. Joe Sacco here does kind of the opposite of what we saw Ben Catcher do. His captions are all jangled, left, right, up, down, like this. His dialogue is very straightforward, horizontal, a little bit rigid. But the captions, which are describing reality, are sort of up and down. Will Eisner, in one of his books, gives this example: "Help, help, I'm trapped at the bottom of this well," with an exclamation point, or really exaggerating those letters, or at least making them expressive. "Help, help, I'm trapped at the bottom of this well." And you can see how one feels more like somebody screaming at the bottom of this well. This works perfectly well. If you gave it to somebody, they would understand your concept pretty well. This, they would probably feel it a little more directly. Dave Sim picked up Will Eisner's mantle and played with lettering and the expressiveness of it, and trying to get the sounds and trying to depict the sounds and depict the rhythms really, really well. And so you see that here. And this is a sad and funny sequence, which I'll let you look at, but it's got a lot going on there. It's got this little bit at the end, which is sad and kind of squishy and a little bit sobby. It's got these traditional panels. It's got this shrieking. It's got this shouting, this please, 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 bless and bless, this kind of stuff. And here is his character. She is modeled after Margaret Thatcher, and she's just giving him this long, paragraphs long lecture. And it doesn't even matter kind of what she's saying, because it's really just designed to assert her authority. And then she begins to assert it in a different way now that she starts to accuse him of sowing his oats with tramps and whores and things like that, and drinking himself to death, which she puts in this very expressive lettering, which is slightly comedic, but her demeanor is cruel. So he's really playing around with trying to get you to feel this character very directly. And there's Dave Sim doing that. He does that all the time. Serifs is hearing voices here. Is Serifs insane? Serifs just made and he's actually having a conversation with himself. He's kind of manic at this point. The black panels, or the black balloons and the white balloons, are sort of contradicting each other. Anyway, he's, again, very expressive in that sort of way that Will Eisner set the gauntlet down for. Throw cold water on him. Lock the front door. Run away. So, excuse me. Just a couple oddities before we finish up. This is EC Comics had a sort of stencil machine that they would do, and it was a trademark for them. I assume there was also a consistency. Maybe it was also easy. I'm not 100% sure why they did it. Maybe it was the brand, but yeah, I've never really researched that, to be honest. But it's unmistakable. This lettering says EC Comic, and there it is again. And they went out of their way to make their titles very expressive too, which is another lecture. Very few people get away with a loose, almost brush-like lettering style. I think Linda Berry might be using a brush here. She's experimented with a million different things, but I think she might be using a brush here. Likewise, just random things here. This is Calvin and Hobbes, but here he's playing around with the lettering again. This alien is speaking in an orange box. Calvin normally speaks in a white, sort of, normal oval. When the alien, even though the animal or the alien has morphed into Calvin, he's speaking in an orange box. And down here, this is Ron Rigi, who's invented more lettering styles than I can count, and for himself. So here it's kind of boxy, it's squarish. This kind of lettering, which he was drawing in the late 90s, became really big about 10 years later, maybe even 7 or 8 years later. You'd see it on vodka bottles and all sorts of things. Here's Ron Ricci, maybe 2 decades later, again, inventing his own lettering. I've never seen an A like that in my life. And the lettering and the drawings are really intertwined now. He really wants you, he doesn't want to make it easy. He wants every panel to be sort of something you put your attention to, and the words and pictures in equal measure, and sort of untangling them is an important part of that. Again, just bouncing around random examples. This is Jason Lutz early on in Berlin. He's got a character who's typing a lot, so there you go, he's drawing typing. His lettering here, when the horn honks, is a really early 20th century typeface, so it has a context. This whole thing is taking place in the 30s in Berlin. That is a font that you would see then. The honk sounds like you would see then. The characters speak in a sort of normal, very Tintin-like sort of word balloon, but it's these things that are unique here, I think. More brushy lettering, again, not too many people can get away with it. Paul Pope, his brushy lettering matches pretty well with his sort of manic, expressive artwork, I think. There it is again. Not a lot of text, of course, in this scene. Jessica Abel's lettering, I think, really integrates with her drawings really well. Her really brushy, lush drawings, which get a little busy, but they actually have a real cleanliness to them at the same time somehow. And the lettering, which again, it really walks the fine line. It looks hurried, but it isn't. It works perfectly well. The whole thing, words and pictures, to me feels a teensy bit like handwriting in a good way. It's personal, it's intimate, but it's also controlled, and there's a lot of structure underneath it. And so that's how she can get away with some of that. We saw that page. We saw that page. We saw that page. So we're recapping. A lot of people will buy themselves an Eames lettering guide. John Porcellino once said, every cartoonist should have an Eames lettering guide unopened in a desk drawer. It's a little tool, and you can look up tutorials online, and you can find out how to use it. It's a little a tool that lets you create ruled lines with very specific heights and leading, and I'll let you sort of learn more about that. You can see an example of those kinds of lines created here, this early comic strip by Burke Breathed. The strips are created in this pre-printed format. So the boxes already exist when he gets the boards, and the lettering is already, or the lines for the lettering are already ruled. And so he just goes in, and that creates a consistency. It means it's not going to get out of control. It's going to be consistent. It's going to be horizontal. It's going to be readable. And there are times when he makes it, if not beautiful, certainly work with the rest of the artwork and be very expressive with the characters, as in here and here. And his word balloons, again, the same kind of lines you're going to see creating the characters are creating the word balloons. Here's a little more close-up of those lines. Ruled lines can work wonders. Another look at Walt Kelly. Now that we've seen some of that, we can see his ruled lines are in there. He's breaking it just a hair because he's got that flair. You can see him breaking the lines a little bit, but it's still really consistent and really readable. Even somebody like Gary Panter, who is known as some people will say is, quote, ugly art, or is anarchic, godfather of punk art, whatever you want to say, he's ruling his lines. If you look close, you can even see they're penciled. You can see a little bit of the lines. Yeah, you see them right here. You see them here. He's ruling those lines. And I know also that he sort of adds a little bit of space with a little, he draws a little O around the top, the bottom, and each side to sort of fit it in. Looks like he missed it there. But if you look anywhere in a Gary Panter comic, you'll see space around it just to give it some air and some readability. There it is again. There are those lines. Even this looks ruled. He's having a lot of fun here. These lines, again, look like these lines. So that is the end of the lettering. Make it readable or interesting and expressive or beautiful or all of the above if you can. And it's really important to make it part of your artwork and treat it like it's another visual element. This page says display and title lettering. That's another show, and it's on there somewhere on the site somewhere. So go ahead and look for it, or you can email. And happy lettering.